Welcome back, guys. Tactical AV here once again. What I was actually hoping to do today was give you guys an idea of what goes on sort of behind the scenes in the making of my videos. Now, the stereo equipment to some might seem pretty simple in a sense of just plug it up, hook it up, and press play and it's done. However, when you start getting into the higher end stereo equipment, there becomes a lot more possibilities on how to connect them, how to wire them up, what type of speakers to use them with, so on and so forth. And then you become getting into issues like input sensitivity, gain, output filters and whatnot, and using different preamplifiers to power amps. But I thought I'd give you guys this illustration when it comes to wiring some of the amplifiers up on the differences the sounds can make. And I've got sort of a unique setup right here with a couple of different amplifiers, power amps, and speakers as well. And the goal here was to try and compare some of the equipment that I've got here to use, and it really did a good job, I think, at doing that. But more or less, I wanted to give you guys an idea of some of the things that I go through when I do make the videos behind the scenes. You see, there's really a lot at work behind the making of my videos in a sense of deciding, well, what am I going to talk about, what am I going to show, and how am I going to set things up to show. That's why I kind of wanted to give you this little video to give you an understanding of some of the things that I do to connect some of this equipment up, how it works, and, well, what some of the differences can be in the sound. So what I'm going to do for us in order to demonstrate this is turn my balance all the way over to the left, so only the left speaker is emitting audio at this point. If you notice, I've got two power amplifiers from Red Dragon Audio here, both of them being the S500. Now technically they're Red Dragon Audio's highest end power amplifier, but technically these are mono blocks as well as stereo power amps. You see, both of these power amplifiers can power two speakers, each of them. So I could technically power 4 speakers with these power amplifiers, but I've got them in a bridged mono configuration, so I'm technically doubling the power, the output power, to 1 speaker in a monaural configuration or setup here. Just one being powering the left speaker and, well, the other powering a completely different speaker in this case. So I'll continue on with my demonstration and say that I've got all of the balance over to the left channel right now, and I've got the power amplifier turned on, and as you can see here, any small increment in volume, especially paired with such a high sensitive speaker like a Klipsch tower, we're going to get a certain sound with a certain input sensitivity and a certain amount of gain, I believe 26 dB coming from these guys, than we would from a speaker like a Kef bookshelf speaker. So I'd like to move over to the right now before we change any of the wiring really quickly to get an idea of how different the sound can be. I'll go ahead and turn that down, but there's one other demonstration I'd like to do, at least with these power amplifiers, before we move on to other stuff. Okay, I'll move the balance back all the way over to the left channel one more time, so just that Klipsch tower speaker is emitting audio. What I'm going to do now is actually switch the power amplifier, one of the Red Dragon Audios, in this case being the left monoblock power amp. So what I'm going to actually go ahead and do here is show you guys around the back of this guy. I'll get some light here. And if you notice on these power amps, they've got small buttons that if you press them, they'll change configurations of the amp here. And while one of them is for XLR balanced connections and RCA, I'm using RCA, we're not going to press that one. What we're going to change is the mono to stereo button really quick while we're still in a bridged configuration or wiring to the speaker. You see, that's going to actually change it from stereo back to mono. So we'll effectively be doubling the power to that one speaker, and then by the flip of a switch, be halving the power of the speaker. You see, one of these power amps technically on its own is capable of 250 watts RMS by 2, or 1000 watts RMS at 1, and at still 8 ohms of resistance. Now, I'm going to let the volume here at a certain amount. I don't want to do quarter because that's going to be just too much here, so we'll go right below 0.25% volume, 25 almost. And I'm going to press that button, and I'd like you to notice the difference in volume. Now, this has to do with decibels, not much to do with the quality necessarily of the audio. You pay attention to when I press this button in the back of here. And once I've pressed the button, the audio is about half the volume, I'd say, and now it's wired the same, but the power amp is now in a stereo mode, so we're effectively only getting half of its power through the one channel right now. I'll go ahead and switch the switch back on, and we'll hear the difference, the louder music coming from the one speaker once again. Okay, so that gave us an idea of what one of the amplifiers can do. Mind you, these are probably my favorite power amplifiers for the time being, at least. They're definitely too much power for certain speakers. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is disconnect the wiring on this once I've turned my preamp off for just a split second. We never want to change any wiring while we have signals being sent to power amplifiers like this in speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the preamp back on. We're going to get the signal now from this speaker wired in a stereo configuration, and I'll turn our balance all the way over to the right this time. Now using just this amp. I'm free from your spell. Free now, baby. I'm free from your spell. Alright, so that was almost a good indication or illustration as to the difference in when you take a power amplifier like this that can be bridged mono and wired conventionally for stereo. You see, it's just as loud, and I'll do it when the power is on, even though I shouldn't. As you can see, just the same amount of volume. So what really becomes interesting, though, is when you change the gain and input sensitivity and pair them with different speakers. Hence the reason I've got the different speaker layout wired up, as for right now at least. I really had to compare things, and what gave me the opportunity to compare these amps were the ability to run a Class AB amplifier at the same time as running these two Class D power amps. You see, I've got this amplifier right here set up to the Polk tower speakers that you see on your left and right. Now, they're technically bi-amped, bi-wired, but it's not a true bi-amp because it's, well, the same amp. We just can separate them this way. seemed just about enough of that. So it's time, well, to take the power amplifiers and to move them into the home theater with the SVS towers now. We'll also try bridging them as well. Alright, so you know what that means, right? Yeah, it's a little bit harder than it seems. Okay, so what I've got to essentially do is take both of these power amplifiers that are set up in, well, quite a decent scenario right now, and place them in the living room situation or setup. A little easier said than done. And well, since I won't be using the same speakers, well, that means different wiring and cables. And while all that might be fun and great for most, well, it's not exactly the most fun part about making the videos. You see, I've had a chance to compare some speakers, and I actually was able to pull some old stuff out of my workshop that I was using years ago. Essentially just getting an idea of how things are working now. But the whole reason I had both of these amplifiers set up in conjunction with each other is, well, I wanted to compare the Class AB amplifier to a much more prestigious Class D power amplifier. You know, I sometimes even find myself making the comparison or distinction between a Class AB and a Class D amplifier as being, well, vinyl and digital, or CD, and the Class D being more the CD, and the Class AB, well, more or less being the vinyl. And obviously that's not a real comparison that I can easily give. However, the comparison that I'm referring to myself is, I've had my wife stand in this room with some music playing on both vinyl record and the same exact song playing on Spotify. Now this time Spotify Premium in the high quality fashion. I asked her to tell me the difference, not knowing between which soundtrack sounded better. I played the exact same song on the vinyl record, and then the same song on the Spotify. Now I used the same amps, same speakers, however I did switch inputs between them, so separating them. At the end of the song, she was able to tell me that the vinyl record, without knowing so, sounded much better. It sounded more dynamic, there was more bass, more treble, and just more instruments noticeable in it. It sounded more realistic and true to the nature of how it should sound. The streaming version sounded a little bit dulled out. It just wasn't as dynamic, and it wasn't as rich. It sounded quieter, too, at the same volume, so that was quite interesting, that we were getting a louder, a more sensitive signal coming from the phono preamp than we were from the actual streaming service. However, the way it worked out with the gain at the moment is the streaming was actually quieter than the vinyl record. So, to someone who doesn't know audio very well, simply something sounding louder can and will sometimes make them think that it sounds better, when that's often not the case. The higher quality form of audio, well, it's difficult to discern whether that's sometimes louder or quieter. It has nothing to do with volume. That has to do more or less with input gain and sensitivity, how loud something can get, not to be confused with the quality of the audio received. Actually, hence the reason I have these brand new Klipsch bookshelf speakers being tried out with a, it's 1970s 4-channel receiver? You see, that's when this comes down to the class or the circuit topology of the power amp. The power amps sound different, and a lot of times your AV receivers are going to be Class D. And come on, people, we should know this if we watched my video on the circuit topologies and classes of power amplifiers. But hands down, all of the AV receivers in the last, well, probably 20 years are definitely some variation of Class D. And well, to me, sometimes an AB amplifier can sound like the difference between vinyl and digital, where vinyl has a much more bassy or sometimes dynamic sound and a richer, truer sound than the Class D power amps can sometimes have. Definitely not the case with the Marantz stuff, and I think a lot of people know that and why they choose Marantz. However, I really wanted to test those Red Reagan audio power amps and see if they could hold up to my opinion of them I had had for so long. The first time I ever saw these two red glowing dragons, it really intrigued me as to the sound because, well, I wasn't necessarily thinking I was seeing what was playing the audio from. It wasn't until the light switched on and I got up a little closer in the actual place that these were playing when I first saw them in the audio event exhibition, or the exhibit that they were currently in. And I think every audiophile knows that not every amplifier is going to sound exactly the same as the first time you heard it compared to your own home. And for those of you that are wondering what the Emotiva equipment is, well, what do you think? Not Class D this time. Or actually an efficient form of Class AB. Most of the Emotiva equipment is and has been for years. You see, what happens when you can take a speaker that can handle up to 85 watts RMS and has a 93 dB input sensitivity, and you connect it to a power amplifier that's a monoblock 1000 watt power amp at 8 ohms to that very speaker? Well, let's just say that we'll be using it to find out what's inside of it later on. Not necessarily something you want to do, though. But also keep this in mind. I will and have those Klipsch Bookshelf Series speakers hooked up to these power amps, and yes, an abridged mono configuration. And, well, of course they work and don't blow the speakers out or cause damage if you use it properly. You see, for those of you that are interested in my, brands of speakers I've owned over the years and had, well, it actually began with Klipsch and moved on to NHT. In fact, the NHT Super Ones for years with my main left and right stereo listening speakers in my office for quite a while. And I had never actually heard the SVS speakers in person, so I did my research for almost 2 years and found out that hands down, if I wanted a speaker that could handle a ton of power but also the frequency response that I was, well, more or less demanding at the time. You see, it was obviously the subwoofers from SVS that drew me onto the company initially, like most people. You see, at one point I traded in my other Velodyne DPS 12 subwoofer, which I actually really came to love over the years. The 2 Velodyne subs were more than enough, however, I just caught myself wanting deeper, clearer, more bass. Really, ultimately, what it came down to was I had bought in a bigger house at the time. And yes, it was the weirdest thing. It intrigued me so much, but it had 2 different basement stairs to get downstairs. A place I was using to keep my antique collections for quite some time had just simply become storage over the years and boxed up with the different products I had bought and, well, held on to. Aha, the fun part. You see, it wasn't until I decided to really tear up the floor of the basement and get down to the nitty-gritty and just redo the whole darn thing. Already bought the projector screen, and it's been sitting in the basement ever since. And, of course, had to replace the entire furnace in the basement. And, of course, my beautiful matching Maytag gold set of washer and dryer had to go and be replaced. Sad to see that happen, but I will miss you guys. But I don't want to talk about the part of the basement I had to rebuild just yet. And brand new box and conduit, of course. Had to replace the entire panel with 2 separate 100 amp panels, but this time one of them dedicated. Which is great because I've always been someone that's owned power conditioners and surge protectors, and well, having a dedicated line isn't of course necessary, but it sure is helpful when you know that each and every one of your audio equipment is hooked up to one panel and all of the other outlets in the house are hooked up to a completely separate panel. That way we're able to have Wi-Fi outlets as well as when someone switches on the microwave or say the vacuum cleaner, we don't end up hearing that inside of our speakers. But as I promised, next I'm going to actually take my 2 power amplifiers and set them up in the home theater, and I'd love for you guys to catch and see what goes on behind the scenes. Stay tuned while I tear all of this down and set it all up again. Once more. Yeah, I sort of hold the opinion he does right now. I'd rather just lay down on the couch and watch a movie instead. I just don't get that luxury, do I? Of course not. And wait a minute, if I'm going to put all of this in my living room, don't I have to actually have the space to do it as well? I'm already breaking the law by having the center channel speaker down on the floor. This TV was supposed to be mounted in this room and, well, center channel, of course, sitting on the top shelf. Which presents a slight issue for the time being. You see, I wasn't exactly always a fan of the AV or the Marantz sitting on top of a glass coffee table, more or less. Wasn't exactly meant to do that, was it? And no, it probably shouldn't, so I'll be moving some things around. Check back soon, guys. I'll have an update for you, and I'll have more behind-the-scenes special features of what goes on behind the scenes in my videos. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up already. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm making so many different changes, coming up with so many different type of things now. You're not going to want to miss it.